On the distant planet of Zarnax 5, the atmosphere was heavy with the weight of ancient customs and deep-rooted traditions. The world was once thriving with a population of highly advanced aliens, their technology and culture spreading far across the galaxy. But over the centuries, their civilization had begun to falter. Zarnax 5, now a shadow of its former glory, was divided into clear classes, those who had wealth and power, and those who did not. And like in all societies that had grown weak over time, the poor were left to suffer. Jiltra was one of the poor. She had never known a life of luxury. She had never experienced the opulence that many of her people boasted of. Her family had always struggled to make ends meet, and after her husband's untimely death, she was left alone to fend for herself in a society that made it clear she was nothing more than an afterthought. Her husband, a man of humble origins just like herself, had passed away in a tragic accident. His death left her devastated, but it also left her with a challenge she was not prepared for. In the alien world of Zarnax 5, widows were not treated with kindness. Especially poor widows like Jiltra. The wealthy and influential members of their society were quick to mock and belittle those who were in her position. They saw widows as weak, as people who could not carry the burdens of life on their own. In the beginning, Jiltra had hoped for sympathy. She had hoped that the loss of her husband would draw some form of compassion from the people around her. But she quickly learned that there was no kindness for her in her world. Instead, she was left with ridicule and disdain. The other women of the elite class would often whisper behind her back, their cold stares following her every move. The men, who were often too proud of their wealth and status, would make jokes at her expense. It was as if her suffering meant nothing to them, and in their eyes, she was just a worthless widow. For months, Jiltra wandered the streets of the city, her heart heavy with grief and frustration. She had no family to turn to, no friends to offer support. The walls of her home felt like a prison, and each day seemed to drag on in a blur of loneliness. She had no hope, no direction. The elite's laughter echoed in her mind, making her feel smaller with each passing day. One evening, as she sat alone in her modest home, a thought crossed her mind. It was a thought that seemed almost too absurd to consider. But in her despair, it grew in her mind like a tiny spark that refused to be extinguished. Could there be a way out of this misery? Was there any chance for her to escape the judgment of her people? She thought of Earth, a planet known for its diversity and its unique ways. Earth was a distant world far from Zarnax 5, but it was also a place that fascinated many of her people. Jiltra had heard stories of humans, of their ways, of their beliefs, and of how they saw the world. They were different from the Zarnaxians in many ways, but they were not bound by the same rigid class systems that defined her world. Humans, she had heard, were more open-minded, more compassionate in their ways. In particular, there was a story that caught her attention. It was about a human custom, a tradition of marriage. Jiltra had learned that in many human cultures, marriages were not just about love or wealth, but also about the coming together of two people from different walks of life. The idea of marriage on Earth was sometimes a way to break through barriers, to unite individuals who might otherwise never have met. The thought fascinated her. Could it be that the humans, with their strange customs, had found a way to rise above the societal structures that held her captive? With this thought in mind, Jiltra began to research more about Earth and its customs. She spent nights reading about their ways, their history, and their traditions. She discovered that the humans often married outside of their social classes, sometimes to people of different races, backgrounds, or even species. It was a concept so foreign to Jiltra, yet so intriguing. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way for her to use this tradition to her advantage. The idea began to take shape in her mind. She would reach out to a human. She would ask one of them to marry her, to help her escape the oppressive hold of her society. If she could form a union with a human, maybe the people of Zarnax 5 would no longer see her as a widow to be scorned. Perhaps in the eyes of the wealthy elite, marrying a human would elevate her status, making her someone they could no longer mock. But the thought terrified her. What if the human refused? What if they saw her as nothing more than a desperate alien? What if they laughed at her too? But even as these doubts filled her mind, there was another feeling that rose up inside her, a sense of hope that she had not felt in months. Jiltra made her decision. She would find a human. She would ask them to marry her. It was a bold move, one that could change everything for her. And so, with trembling hands and a heart filled with both fear and excitement, Jiltra sent a message. She reached out to a human who had been working on a project on Zarnax 5. His name was Ethan, a space engineer known for his brilliance and his kindness. He had come to the planet to help with a project related to the new technologies being developed by the Zarnaxian government. She had seen him a few times in passing, his gentle demeanor and his compassionate eyes standing out amidst the hustle and bustle of her city. Ethan was unlike the other humans she had met. He was not here for power or riches. He was here to help, to learn, and to work alongside the Zarnaxians. His reputation among the lower classes of Zarnax 5 was that of a humble man, someone who did not believe in the barriers that separated one species from another. She drafted the message carefully, her fingers hesitating over each word. She knew it was a risky move, and yet she could not ignore the feeling that this might be her only chance. She sent the message, then waited. The days that followed felt like an eternity. Jiltra's anxiety grew with each passing hour. She thought of the possible outcomes, of how he might respond. Would he laugh at her? Would he think she was foolish for asking such a thing? Then, one evening, she received a reply. Ethan's message was brief, but it filled Jiltra with an unexpected warmth. He agreed to meet her. There were no questions, no doubts in his words. He simply wanted to understand why she had asked him. The meeting was set, and as Jiltra prepared for it, she felt a mix of excitement and fear. She had taken the first step towards something that could either change her life forever or break her heart. The days after Jiltra had sent the message felt like an eternity. Every passing moment seemed to stretch out endlessly, and the doubt in her mind only grew. She spent hours pacing her small home, trying to focus on something, anything, to distract herself from the uncertainty that gnawed at her. But nothing seemed to work. She couldn't stop thinking about Ethan and what he might say when they met. She had told herself that this was her last chance, her final opportunity to break free from the cruelty of her world. If Ethan rejected her, then she would have no choice but to accept that her fate was sealed. She would forever remain a widow in the eyes of her people, mocked and ridiculed by the elites. But if he accepted her request, it could change everything. It could be the key to escaping the prison she felt trapped in. Jiltra had never felt so vulnerable. She had always been strong, or at least had tried to be, but asking for help in this way felt different. It wasn't just about asking for charity or sympathy. It was about asking a stranger for something much deeper, a lifeline, a chance to rise above the pain and suffering that had consumed her for so long. She was asking him to marry her, to take a risk on someone like her, someone from the lower classes who had nothing to offer but a broken heart and a desperate plea for change. Finally, the day arrived. Jiltra stood in front of the small, modest building where she had arranged to meet Ethan. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her hands trembled as she adjusted her clothes. She had tried to look presentable, but there was no hiding the anxiety that radiated from her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before stepping inside. Ethan was already waiting. He stood by the window, his back to her, looking out at the bustling city below. He was tall, with short, dark hair and a calm, composed demeanor. His presence seemed to fill the room, yet there was a warmth to him, a kind of quiet strength that made Jiltra feel both at ease and nervous at the same time. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and for a moment their eyes met. His gaze was steady, searching her face for some clue as to what she had asked of him. "Jiltra," he said, his voice soft but clear. "I'm glad you reached out to me. I've been thinking about your message." Jiltra nodded, her voice caught in her throat. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but now that it was real, the words didn't come easily. She cleared her throat and took a step forward. "I didn't know who else to turn to," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "My people. They look down on me. They think I'm weak because I've lost my husband. They don't care about me, about my suffering. But you don't see me like that, do you?" Ethan studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. He had heard of the harshness of Zarnaxian society, of how the wealthy often mocked the poor, especially those who were grieving. He knew that widows, especially ones from lower classes, were treated with cruelty and scorn. But there was something in Jiltra's eyes that made him believe that she wasn't just asking for pity. She was asking for something more, something that had to do with dignity, with respect, and with a chance to escape the confines of her world. "No," Ethan said, his voice firm yet gentle. "I don't see you like that. I see a woman who is strong enough to ask for help, strong enough to take a chance, And I respect that. Jiltra's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to say those words, but they filled her with a sense of relief she hadn't known she needed. She had expected him to question her, to ask why she had chosen him, a human, for something so important. But instead, he had understood her in a way that no one else had. I don't know if this is the right thing to ask of you, Jiltra continued, her voice barely above a whisper. But I need your help. I need you to marry me. If you do, I think I can finally escape the judgment of my people. They might see me differently if I'm married to someone from another world. I know it's strange, but I believe this is my only chance. Ethan remained silent for a moment, processing her words. He had come to Zarnax 5 to help with a project, to work alongside the Zarnaxians, but this was different. This wasn't just a matter of diplomacy or cooperation. This was a personal request, one that came from the depths of Jiltra's heart. And despite the strangeness of it, despite the risks involved, he couldn't bring himself to turn her away. You're right, Ethan said finally, his tone thoughtful. This is an unusual request. I don't know what the consequences would be for either of us, but I don't believe it's wrong. You're asking for a chance to change your life, and I respect that. Jiltra's heart soared, but she didn't want to show too much emotion. She was afraid it might all crumble if she allowed herself to believe too strongly in the possibility of success. Are you willing to do this? She asked, her voice steady now, though her hands still shook. Are you willing to marry me? Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. Yes, Jiltra, I'm willing. I can't promise that it will be easy, but I'm willing to try. For you. For the first time in a long while, Jiltra felt a flicker of hope. It was faint, but it was there. She had asked for help, and now, for the first time, someone had offered it without judgment. It wasn't the answer she had expected, but it was the answer she had needed. They spoke for a while longer, discussing the logistics of their marriage, what it would mean for both of their worlds, and how they would handle the challenges ahead. Jiltra had no illusions about how difficult it would be. She knew that the elites of her world would not take kindly to this union. They would see it as a betrayal, as something beneath them. But she also knew that this was her chance to make a difference, to stand up for herself in a way she never could before. As they parted ways, Jiltra felt a sense of calm she hadn't known in months. She didn't have all the answers, but she had taken the first step toward something better. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that things could change. But little did they know, the path ahead would not be as simple as they hoped. The moment word spread of their marriage, the elites of Zarnax 5 would do everything in their power to stop it, to crush it before it could take root. And the challenges they would face together, as individuals and as a couple, would be unlike anything they had ever imagined. In the weeks that followed, Jiltra and Ethan's lives began to shift in ways neither had expected. The decision to marry had been a bold one that had set into motion a chain of events neither of them could have predicted. For Jiltra, there was a sense of disbelief that she had actually made the choice, and that Ethan, a human, had agreed to it. But there was also a new sense of strength in her. For the first time in months, she felt as though she had a purpose, something to work toward beyond the quiet sorrow of her widowhood. Ethan, too, found himself in a whirlwind of uncertainty. He had not come to Zarnax 5 for personal matters. He had come for his work, to help with technological advancements and foster understanding between species. Yet, his decision to marry Jiltra had opened a door to something far more complicated than he could have imagined. He knew the consequences of their union wouldn't be simple, but he was determined to stand by her. As word of their engagement spread, it wasn't long before the elite members of Zarnaxian society caught wind of the news. The reaction was swift and harsh. The wealthy and powerful saw it as a mockery of their traditions, a stain on their carefully constructed world of privilege. To them, Jiltra's decision to marry a human was an insult. It was a clear challenge to the established order, a message that the lower classes were no longer willing to accept their place in the shadows. Jiltra had always known that the elite would never accept her. She had been scorned by them before, but now, with her decision to marry Ethan, the hatred grew louder. Rumors began to swirl around the city, whispers in the corners of buildings, in the markets, and in the elite circles. The rich and powerful mocked her, calling her foolish, naive, and delusional. They said that she was nothing more than a desperate widow looking to climb the social ladder by using a human as her ticket out of obscurity. But Jiltra wasn't afraid of their words. She had heard worse in her life. She had been called weak, a burden, and worthless. She had endured their cruel laughter for far too long. This time their words didn't reach her. She knew she was doing the right thing, and that was enough. Ethan, too, had his share of doubts. He had come to understand that marrying Jiltra was not just about love. It was about challenging everything that had been set in place by centuries of tradition. But he was no stranger to difficult decisions. He had faced challenges in his own life, both on Earth and in his travels across the galaxy. He knew the road ahead would be filled with obstacles, but he also knew that standing by Jiltra was the right thing to do. He was willing to fight for their future, no matter the cost. The couple spent their days preparing for the wedding, making plans that would, in all likelihood, change the course of their lives forever. They knew that the wedding itself would be a public affair, and they were prepared for the backlash. But they were also determined to show the world that their love wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was something worth fighting for. On the day of the wedding, the city was filled with an air of expectation. The elites had gathered in their grand estates, preparing to watch the event unfold from afar, waiting to see if Jiltra and Ethan's union would survive the pressure of their judgment. They expected the ceremony to be a spectacle, a display of human naivety and alien weakness. They didn't understand that the real spectacle would be the message it sent. This wedding was more than just a union of two people. It was a statement to the world that things could be different, that the old ways of thinking could be challenged and changed. Jiltra stood in front of the altar, her heart pounding with excitement and nerves. She wore a simple but beautiful dress, one that reflected her humble origins. It wasn't the grand, extravagant attire of the elite, but it was perfect for her. It was a symbol of her journey, of her strength, her determination, and her refusal to be defined by her past. Ethan stood beside her, wearing a dark suit that made him look every bit the part of a man who was ready to take on whatever came next. His hand held hers, steady and firm. He was here beside her, and that was all that mattered. The ceremony was held in a large hall, a place that had once been used for gatherings of the elite. But today it was different. Today it was a place for something new. The walls were filled with representatives from both Zarnax 5 and Earth, a mix of species and cultures, all witnessing the moment when a poor alien widow and a human engineer would unite against the odds. As they exchanged vows, Jiltra's voice wavered only slightly. She spoke of her love for Ethan, of how he had shown her that there was more to life than just surviving. She spoke of the future they would build together, one where they could be free from the judgment of those who had held them back. Ethan spoke of his admiration for her strength, for her courage in the face of adversity. He promised to stand by her side, no matter what challenges they would face, and to always respect her as an equal. When the vows were exchanged, it wasn't just a marriage that took place. It was the beginning of a new era, one that would forever alter the course of their worlds. As they sealed their union with a simple kiss, the crowd erupted into applause. It was not the applause of the elite who had remained silent, but the applause of the people, those who had supported Jiltra from the beginning, those who had witnessed her struggles and had cheered her on. They saw this marriage not as a disgrace, but as a victory, a triumph over the limitations that society had placed on them. But even as the applause echoed in the hall, the challenges were far from over. The elites, though silent now, would not give up their power so easily. They would do everything they could to tear the couple apart, to force them to return to their place. Jiltra and Ethan knew this. They knew that their fight was just beginning, but they also knew that they were no longer alone. They had each other, and that was all they needed. In the days that followed the wedding, Jiltra and Ethan faced the harsh realities of their decision. The elites launched a campaign of slander, attempting to paint them as foolish and reckless. They spread rumors, telling lies to discredit them, to break their bond. But each time they faced an obstacle, they grew stronger. Their love, their resolve was unshakable. Ethan worked tirelessly to find ways to bring the people of both worlds together, to show them that unity, not division, was the key to a better future. He reached out to the governments, to the organizations that had once ignored the poor and the oppressed, to tell them that they had a chance to change things. It was a slow process, but with each passing day, their influence grew. They were no longer just a couple. They were symbols of hope, of change, of the possibility that a better world was within reach. The elites continued to resist, but their grip on Zarnax 5 was slipping. The people were no longer content to live in fear of the powerful few. They had seen the courage of Jiltra and Ethan, and it had inspired them to stand up for themselves. The fight was long and difficult, but the tide was turning. And as Jiltra and Ethan stood together, watching the world around them change, they knew that their love was more than just a personal victory. It was a victory for all those who had been oppressed, for all those who had been silenced. Their journey had just begun, but the road ahead was filled with the promise of a future where everyone, regardless of their background or status, could find their place in the world.